Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us for Operational Excellence in Oil and Gas. My name is Nicole Bamford, and I'm the moderator for today's session. On behalf of Leslie, Quinn, Candace, Grant, and I, we thank you for joining us for Day 2. This presentation, Build Oil and Gas Operational Resilience Through Practical Workforce Scheduling Automation, will be given by Sachin Agrawal, Chief Technology Officer at Shiftboard, and his presentation promises to be well worth a listen. Before we get started, here are some quick administrative points. During the webinar, if you have questions for the presenter, please submit them in the Q&A box on your screen, and these will be answered during the question portion of the session. Likewise, for any technical issues, please write them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them right away. The widgets on your screen can be resized and dragged around for your viewing preferences. We encourage you to visit the Resource Center on your screen for additional content and resources we and our sponsors have provided for you. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, and I'll now hand it over to Sachin so he can begin.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining in today's talk. We're really excited to spend some time with you. So as mentioned, today's talk, I'm going to be talking about how workforce automation can help you in your operational facility. And I'm going to go over a couple of topics and diving into a couple of key areas here. So, we'll touch on COVID, but really, here where I'm focusing the talk is around operational excellence focused individuals who take care of their organizations and are really diving into dealing with complexity, as well as dealing with labor costs and safety of their workforce. And having spent a lot of time at sites, I know those are things that are non-negotiable and are utmost importance. So we'll dive into those, kind of talk through how that is played out in many of the organizations that we work with in the oil and gas industry. So, the topics I'm going to cover really focus in on automation, but, just to remember, it's really an enabler for what you will be doing. And, I know that the folks here, especially folks in operational excellence, have written the book on how to improve and improve operations within your organization. And what I've tried to do here is really take those concepts that are probably familiar to you and put them in a context applying it to your employee workforce. So just a little bit of background about me. For the last 10 years, really been focused in on helping organizations in asset-intensive industries, really diving into oil and gas and refining and downstream and midstream operations, and been focusing on scheduling solutions that have been focused on the high compliance, regulatory and union needs in the oil and gas industry. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend a lot of time at sites and with operators, and the outcomes that I'm going to be talking about today are really going to be based off of real-life examples that we've seen working with clients. So you can see down below, work with a number of large industry leading companies. So to kick things off, actually, I'm going to try to make this a little interactive. I'm going to ask you guys to, fill out a poll here. So I think you should be able to click on your screen. But the question for you is, how does the hourly workforce at your facility contribute to implementing and achieving your operational excellence goals? So I'm talking about the folks that are, running your facilities. How do they help you achieve operational excellence? I'll give a few seconds for folks to fill in the poll here. Please click through. So I'm going to move forward here in just a couple of seconds, and we'll see what people say. So here we go. Awesome. So, 2/3 of you exactly said, it's critical to your goals. A third of you said, it's moderate contribution to your goals. So obviously pretty important to making things happen. And so, I'm basing this on the premise that, your hourly workforce is very important to you and to your people, and I'll keep coming back to that theme. Since nobody said it's low involvement, that's great. So what are the opportunities that we see and, where we can improve? So obviously, your staffing costs and your overtime costs, those are critical. That is, especially in today's environment, everyone's always looking for ways to become leaner and become more efficient. So we'll definitely touch on that. But dollars don't capture the whole picture, especially when you're talking about your employees. And you have to really think about your employee happiness. And it's great if you're running really efficiently, but if your people are not happy, we do know, and we know that finding talented labor in the oil and gas environment is difficult. So you really need to be thinking about how do you retain your talent, how do you keep them trained up as needed. And then obviously, as we said before, safety and compliance with all of the regulations that make the oil and gas industry so difficult is non-negotiable and must be adhered to. So those are key areas where your hourly workforce is critical, and there really is opportunity to improve in this area and to have really strong visibility and also help your bottom line. So those are the things we want to achieve, and we'll kind of talk through those in phases. Before we jump into the the details of how automation can help, I do want to touch on COVID, and just make sure we talk about this. It's obviously an unprecedented time right now, and it's having obviously very critical impacts to the whole world. And, as we've been working with our existing clients, there's been sort of an interesting trend emerging. When the pandemic first occurred, we definitely saw, the reaction was, pretty much lockdown, nothing changes. We want to really keep things the status quo. But now, as time has moved on, we're seeing many of our clients come talk to us about, how do we add more flexibility? How do we actually improve and change the way we're working? It's actually creating an impetus to modernize the way management of these workforces are occurring. And one of the key trends I'm seeing is frequently folks saying, well, for our office workers, non-hourly, the folks in our office building, we've created a bunch of flexibility, many different things for enabling people to get their work done. And we have not been able to do the same level of flexibility for folks, in our facilities. And that really drives, some changes. And that starts pushing, a bit of a cascading effect where, the maybe historical underinvestment in tooling around managing hourly workforces starts really rearing its head. So, without having the data, often being locked away in Excel spreadsheets, really starts putting pressure on, if we want to make changes, what's going to happen? I don't have visibility, not having visibility into, compliance needs and policies, all of that stuff starts piling on. So, while I think, it's easy to think that COVID-19 means, we got to not make changes and really be conservative, I think as this drags on, the impetus for becoming, let's say, more aware of opportunities for change, increasing visibility is actually coming to the forefront. So the things that we talk about now, again, I think are really applicable in this COVID environment. So as we work with our clients, we see this very common maturity path in terms of how they work with their hourly workforce, and especially as they start thinking about operational excellence and applying continuous improvement principles. So, to start off with, the first phase really is around consistency and safety. Can we do the schedules in a consistent way and do the same thing every time? So all of you, especially in operational excellence, know that if you have procedures and every time you do a procedure, it ends up being different, and it's done differently, you know that that's not a great state to be in. And often that is really what's happening with how hourly schedules are managed and how your hourly workforce is managed. Each supervisor has their own way of doing it. And if you are inconsistent on your process, obviously all your safety regulations and compliance needs are likely also being consistently applied. So that's the first step. getting consistent, once that's there, that unlocks a lot of capabilities. You think, okay, well now I've got consistency, where am I going to see some cost reduction? Often that is the phase, but before that, the second part that we see coming in is really this idea of fairness and flexibility for your workforce. Again, I kind of mentioned this earlier, and we'll dive into it, but it's still a competitive market even in COVID. Finding skilled workers, especially those that have experience in your highly regulated industries, they're hard to find. And data, we'll talk about it, shows that people really care about being treated fairly and that they have the flexibility they need for the work-life balance. And I think, the gut check that we should all use is, at your facility, and think about your hourly workers, how many of them, care deeply about overtime and who gets overtime and, how it's distributed. Whenever I ask this question, with clients, it's always, 100%. Of course, this report, it's a very personal and very important thing. So if you don't think about your employees as part of this process, you'll very quickly hit some strong change management challenges and strong resistance. But once you've unlocked those first two steps, that's really where now you should hopefully have the data you need, as well as the buy-in from your organization to really be able to optimize your resources and start finding those cost reductions and that efficiency. And then hopefully also be improving a number of other metrics for your organization. So we'll talk a little bit here now, diving into this idea of consistency and safety. And again, jumping into a poll here around what you have in your organization. So do you have the visibility into your shift schedules that they are always compliant with all your site policies, practices, and regulations week after week? So your overtime policies and practices and all of your procedures. So question of, do you have that proactively? Do you get it after it occurs, or do you have no visibility to this information? So again, I'll give everyone a few seconds here to put in their poll, and please submit as quickly as you can. So there we go. So that's interesting here. Now, we got a 50-50 split in terms of the information and the retroactive information being reviewed. That's what we see very commonly. And here it's awesome to see that some of you have visibility proactively into your compliance needs. But this is not surprising that so many of you get it retroactively. What we see very frequently is schedules are managed by hand, and the tools like Excel are very common. And the procedures and practices of how overtime is done is somewhat evolutionary. Often there's letters of agreement if you're unionized, and letters and emails and side letters, and it kind of grows over time. But the reality is what we see is there's personal sort of interpretations. Different managers have their own way of doing things. And this is then compounded with the fact that most of the reports we see people using in downstream especially are payroll reports. So these are retroactive in their nature. Once payroll has been run and the job has been worked, the issue, or if there's something wrong or something inefficient, has long gone. It's already long passed. So this is what we see very commonly. And the idea here is, are there things that we can do to get ahead of the curve, become proactive? And that's where, again, being consistent and knowing that information ahead of time can really help. So how do we, measure success and outcomes of what we can improve? So, step one, the time it takes. But, as you start thinking about it of, where else you can improve, errors in scheduling or deviations from policies, knowing that ahead of time and saying, okay, next week there may be some deviations, but those are needed in order to meet maybe certain goals or certain realities in the site. And if you have that information ahead of time, then you as business leaders and operational excellence leaders can, advise and you can make business decisions weighing out all of the information. The worst thing you can do is really just be caught unaware because that information just wasn't available to you. So these are some of the measures that are really critical. So when we talk about how you can go and improve and bring automation into your scheduling practices, here I often go with this model, what I call labor practice management. So every organization, whether you are unionized or not, if you've got hourly workforces, you have a set of labor practices that have been established at your organization. And I try to organize them into these buckets. The first one is really, your definitions and, often called rules. You'll have rules around overtime pay, if you manage fatigue, you've got union agreements, compliance, probably around OSHA and safety, emergency response teams. Those are all defined, and you need to understand all of those and be able to write those down. And, again, defining all this doesn't necessarily need a digital tool. It helps automate it, but this is important for your organization to know and have ready. On the flip side, you need to know what's currently the state of your organization. I call this a data model because I'm a nerd. But do you actually understand, all of your employees, what they're currently trained in, when they're expiring? Have you done a, risk assessment across all of your jobs in terms of, all of the various safety factors? If you've set all of that information up, the last and third piece that you need is an understanding of the workflows within your organization. And all of you, again, have this defined likely. Maybe not written down, but it's definitely standardized, or an expectation of standardization. Okay, how am I going to fill in all of my schedules? What are the steps here? And this is what's often lost in automation, as a strong definition of the workflows of how you're going to do this. And so many of you will, probably have, procedures written down for, if there's an emergency call out in the middle of the night, or how are you going to do overtime utilization. Those things need to be managed and written down. So if you have that organized, then you can move from there. Apologies for the ring. COVID, we're working from home here. So what does this look like from an automation perspective? If you have a compliant schedule, all of your organizations probably schedule something like this, where you have a scheduler that says, okay, or a supervisor that I need to fill somebody in. Maybe I need an operator on the board job, and it's the night shift tonight that I need somebody. And you'll have a whole bunch of rules, procedures that define what that needs to be. And when you bring automation, that can really help you define the correct person to fill in, again, tied to your organization and your site. And that's going to be unique to each of your sites. If you work in a multi-site organization, those will be different. And if you can automate this selection process and get consistent, that every time there's an opening, no matter who's doing it, and you get the same result, that's where you get that consistency. And if that result follows all of your site rules, that's where you can get a strong lead on safety. So this is just a quick screenshot of how we manage it, in our tool. But basically, that whole model can be automated. And what you're seeing here is this, list of employees coming in for that opening when you were just selected, and say, who could fill this in? And it's a little bit hard to read. It's small, I know, but when you're seeing the red and the green there on the side of that list, the red are basically people who have been filtered out because they're not meeting some of your safety regulations at your facility. And the greens are folks that pass all those rules. So if you can automate those rules and checks in your system and really think about it, hey, if I've got an opening, I'm choosing the right person, that can really have a improvement in consistency gain. And it can also save a bunch of time for your organization. So what can this do? What do you want to make sure you're thinking about as you think about automation, and especially in this frame of consistency? You want to get some automation, obviously, in terms of your workflow. And the scenario that really can drive this the most is, as I was mentioning, relief shift scheduling. At that last minute, when an operator calls off sick, let's say in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they say, hey, my child is sick, I'm taking them to the emergency room, I'm not going to be able to come in for my shift in 2 hours. that scramble to go fill that right person in, following all the fairness rules and safety precautions and everything. That is when it really comes to a head. And if you have confidence that the right person, the safest person, is going to be chosen in those scenarios, then you know that in your day-to-day scheduling, everything will come about. So optimization can help you with that workflow, can help you then reduce your overtime by selecting an optimized employee, and then give you that proactive view into compliance and auditing. So, just to give you some results in terms of what we were able to achieve, again, building automation into your scheduling. At Shell Oil, which is our largest deployment, we were able to fully automate across 24 different union agreements. That led to a $3 million a year in administrative staff savings in terms of time. And across all of these organizations, they were able to have now visibility at the corporate level of RP 755 fatigue risk management, as well as visibility into their union compliance as well. So strong results there through this automation. On top of that, there was obviously gains in overtime cost reduction. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So the next phase I want to jump into is the idea of fairness and flexibility with your workforce. So again, jumping into a quick poll, and you guys can rate this on a 5 to 1 scale, 5 being most important. How important is correctly scheduling overtime, vacations, off days, things like that to your hourly workforce at your site? 5 being it's super important, 3 neutral, 1 your employees don't really care about this. Again, I'll give everybody a few seconds here to hit submit on your poll questions. So see, I'm gonna move forward now. Let's see. All right, so 100% on very important. So obviously, hourly workers care deeply about these things. I didn't expect it to be 100% on number 5, but that's awesome. So, I'm preaching to the choir here. Obviously, this is super important. You know that your employees are critical to your success here. So, also you should know that your CEOs of your companies also think of this as being a key challenge. So this was a PricewaterhouseCoopers CEO survey in oil and gas that they did a few years ago. But basically 66% of the CEOs out there said that finding talent and the limited supply of talent was one of their top concerns. I think the subsequent question, a very related one, was, losing talent and being able to retain talent was, about 60% in terms of a top concern. So this is obviously a key issue in the oil and gas industry. If you are taking care of your talent, it's important of how you can retain and attract that talent. So a lot of talk goes into the idea of millennials. So as we get to 2025, 75% of your workforce will be millennial. I think the tight labor market in skilled workers is still going to be there even in this COVID world. So, one of the things that we do see is that hourly workers really now in this shift in the demographics expect more. So this balance of career, life, family is more and more important, and you have to be providing that to your workforce and able to retain them. This is a way that you can also attract talent and retain them. We are hearing more and more that workers will flip to a different company if it provides them a better work-life balance. And this really is a big demographic change that has changed over the last couple of decades. So something that if you're still scheduling the same way that was done 30 years ago, your facility, there's probably room for improvement here of how you're dealing with your workforce. So one of the key measures that we look at when we're working with clients is, absenteeism rates. Can we improve that? And if we're bringing employees in and engaging them, but also, underneath that, are we doing a great job of, ensuring that we're minimizing the number of unwanted shifts, for employees. So, you're forcing employees or giving them mandatory overtime. What are the things we can do? So again, there's now a lot of things that you can do to improve this. So what are ways that you can modernize your scheduling practices here? Obviously, many of these things you can do without a tool. These are all things you could enable today. The challenge, though, is these are difficult to do without actually thinking about it and putting a tool into place, especially when you really want to collect a lot of information from employees, or having employees manage trades, be able to do that from the comfort of their own home. And so many opportunities here, publishing farther in advance of your schedule, and really empowering employees to say when they're available and to be able to volunteer for shifts, and being able to do that from home. We've seen that really provide a lot of impact. And when we talk to many of our customers, and I've had the opportunity to do some site visits, one of the most touching stories that I had was, an operator from a site told me that, being able to volunteer from home actually changed his marriage, and a very positive impact, because before he was making schedule decisions, when he didn't have his phone on him inside of the plant, and now he was able to collaborate with his family and his wife and make those decisions. So that was a very positive impact to his marriage. That was very touching for me, and made me felt very rewarding for what I do. But it's definitely something that's available. And the other thing that is surprising, that is when people have some visibility into scheduling. So especially things like overtime equalization, knowing that there's an audit trail of actions that have been done, transparency into those things. That also gives people a lot of faith that the right things are being done. So with automation, you can have a view that gives you that. So in our tool, we're continuously scanning and looking at your schedules, and also looking at how you're following the defined workflows. So, sometimes managers are malicious, maybe, or are playing favorites, and they give overtime to their buddy. Most of the time, it's an honest mistake, just lack of time. And here with automation, again, you can make it a lot easier to find the right person. But in the case a mistake is made, you can proactively find it ahead of time before you publish the schedule. Again, you have the ability to build trust with your workforce. So here are all of the checkboxes and little X's. Again, the screenshot's a little bit small, but basically that's telling you where there are deviations from your fairness practices that have been defined. So just a couple of quick results here of what's possible. So at a USW site where we implemented some of these fairness practices and being able to do volunteering and creating a more fair assignment process and optimization of trying to provide employees with shifts where they wanted to work, we were able to increase the number of preferred assignments to 95%. Now, because they were doing manual scheduling before, they didn't have a great number for it, but the surveys from employees that it's happening all the time. And now with automation, they were able to increase that. The real value, though, that we measure with their HR system was that there was 38% reduction in absenteeism. So I know that almost every organization I ever go to has, big absenteeism initiatives. And being able to drop absenteeism by 38%, and then do that, in relatively short order is a pretty strong result. And what was interesting is they did this as a bit of an A/B study. They deployed this to one part of the facility and didn't deploy automation in this tool to another. The absenteeism at the other side of the plant stayed absolutely stable, did not move. So it truly attributed to being able to provide some worker focus. In a UAW site, so Auto Workers Union, we were able to reduce union grievances by 96%, again, through automation and throwing in that consistency and giving people that visibility to when mistakes occurred. So that resulted in $800 an employee per year savings, as well as the automation gave supervisors 8 hours a week back on the shop floor. So that was basically one whole shift a week, equivalently back on the floor of the. That was a huge driver. So Again, there's knock-on effects of adding automation and getting supervisors back onto the floor doing what they do best versus being locked in an office building schedules. Obviously has important knock-on effects. So the next thing I'm going to transition to is talking about how continuous optimization and cost reduction can come into play in your facility. So as we look at areas for continuous improvement, there's many different things that we can look at, but there are opportunities here. Once you have the data and you have the information, you can start reducing your overtime. You can start looking at optimization in how many staff you need, as well as where they need to be trained. And so I know that you guys work in a constantly changing environment, and so we've kind of tried to model our approach and what you need to do based off of continuous improvement. That should be very familiar to all of you. So starting off with gathering some insights, how do you make a plan, validate what's happened as you've made these changes, and then obviously keep that loop going over and over. So the first area that you really want to make sure is you want to have strong insights into your data. And the risk here is payroll data really is not enough information for you. As we talked earlier, it's lagging, and often it's missing the information you really need to make strong decisions. The biggest thing is that it's often missing the individual job assignment. So where in the facility was the person working? What were they doing? Were they assigned to training, or were they working the regular shift? And not having that information really can create some gaps in your knowledge. So having some really strong visibility to know where you're spending your time, how much of it is going towards your regular production jobs versus training or meetings or special assignments is really important to know, and that often gets lost in payroll. And that also being retroactive is a challenge. You can't fix issues ahead of time. Another area is are you able to ahead of time get ahead of the curve and really think about what are your options for cost optimization? So you have that holistic view at the plant level of where are we spending time. Now the idea is, do you have a view at the micro level of is every single one of your assignments optimized? So often when I talk to supervisors and say, hey, is there opportunity for gains? They have to say, well, we think that we're doing a pretty good job, but here and there overtime assignments sneak through. So now with automation, one of the key things you can really think about is there, can you now be scanning and looking at your schedule for optimizations every time? So this is a view for a scheduler saying, hey, these are maybe some inefficient overtime assignments. Did you think about ways that you could move your workforce around and maybe avoid bringing somebody in for overtime and be able to manage that shift using regular workforce in your regular shift teams? So again, getting proactive on that. I'm going to skip ahead here, and just with time coming to a close here, the other area that is really critical is, are you thinking about your training and the matrix of how you're optimizing who you're training? So this little set of graphs here on the right, this is just a visualization, a fancy visualization that we sometimes build for our clients to help them see the various jobs that their employees are trained for. So the thin lines versus thick lines, the thick lines are basically where you've got more people cross-trained between those various jobs. Thin lines is where you've got very few people who can work that. So if you see some of these nodes where it's very, very thin, faint lines to some of the jobs, that's where there's some risk. And you can, we can start modeling and saying, okay, well, maybe we want to make some of those thin lines a little bit thicker so that there's some cross-training, and you can start building a plan so that you have more and more opportunities for resiliency in your operations and less risk of burning out a couple of employees who are the only ones that can work certain jobs. So really looking at your training and having this analysis and really thinking about what we could do to balance your training matrix is super important. And the other one is when you think about training and your staffing is, can you do some what-if analysis on your schedule and think about what you could do to, what changes would happen to your facility? So some of this, you could think about it as saying, okay, well, if there is, especially in the COVID world, knock on wood, if, a bunch of employees were out for a while, what would happen to our organization from our ability to operate? Or if I, were able to hire some more heads, what would that do to my overtime, my ability to execute on projects, things like that. So being able to do some what-if analysis, say what would happen as I change my staffing and training is really important. So now, kind of going to the end here, as we reach on time, as you have visibility into this information, you can really start tracking and enforcing these changes. So you can start setting goals, budgets for your site in terms of what they're going to be doing, as well as having visibility at an organization level of KPIs, so safety, overtime, efficiency, all of these things. And as you guys all know, that once you have that visibility and you can start tracking and setting goals, now you can get into that continuous improvement loop and start driving results. So as we've done this with a couple of different organizations, we had an 800-person facility. As they got visibility in and managed their staffing levels, the results were quite astounding. They were actually able to save 40,000 hours of overtime a year. This was a mix of adding a couple of heads, reducing training and other things that were happening at bad times, doing it when they had more capacity. So that was averaged out to about 50 hours of overtime, unnecessary overtime per person per year. We also had an oil refinery that was able to reduce the average number of certifications that we're training people for from 3.8 to 3.2, so that was the savings in training. But while increasing the amount of coverage they had, because they were just smarter about cross-training and looking at how they could distribute their cross-training around their facility. So cost savings from the training, but also increased coverage. So again, this is the maturity path. These were the kind of the phases that we walked through here in the presentation. Again, starting with that consistency and safety, you build that model, get automation in that. You can make sure you get the same results. You take care of your employees, make sure that they are being treated fairly, that they have the flexibility to meet their work-life balance. And then that enables you to drive, as an operational excellence expert, optimization and cost reduction, visibility, the data, and the tools to go drive change, increase safety, and reduce cost. So that's how scheduling automation can drive and help you meet your operational excellence goals at your facility. So I'll wrap it up there and maybe open it up to questions.
Hi, Sachin. So we are out of time for questions. However, there is some questions from the audience, and we just let you know that all these questions will go to Sachin, and he'll be able to reply to them to you after the webinar has wrapped up. So thank you very much, Sachin, for your very informative and interesting webinar. For those in the audience, if you'd like to listen again, this webinar will be available on demand shortly. And finally, thank you to you wherever you are for joining in today and taking the time to listen. We look forward to having you on the next session starting in just a few moments. And again, Sachin, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention and your time.